Hey there, and welcome to another devlog from my Untitled Cute Space Game. This is Thousand Ant, and I'm Matt Shell. And in this video, I want to talk about some of the sort of ideas and concepts that have gone into the world of the game and that are kind of informing the design, how they're informing the design, and where some of those influences have come from. Let's get started. In the previous video, I mentioned kind of how I had thought about modifying the scope of the game, making it a little bit bigger, getting it back towards the kind of life simulator idea, Animal Crossing-like idea that I had had previously and then kind of moved away from and then come back to, and then the decision to grow the scope. What that has allowed me to do, and part of that process has been really thinking about the design and what do I really want the design of this game to be and what do I want it to be about? What do I want it to communicate? So in that process, I've been doing some research on other kind of life simulator type games, farming games, kind of slice of life games, right? Obviously, I've been playing Animal Crossing. That was kind of a big influence. I also went and checked out Stardew Valley, which I haven't got a ton of time into, but I kind of got an idea of the surface level of the game. One of the things that playing Stardew actually crystallized for me and thinking about it in relation to Animal Crossing is actually how much of a role money plays in the game. And money is obviously a rich, complicated, interesting historical and political theme. And it's also an interesting theme in terms of game design. So one of the things that I did in the process of working on the design was I actually reached out to a writer who I had been reading, Michael Sellers, who has a book called Advanced Game Design, which I mentioned in another video talking about my favorite game design books. I'm a big fan of the book and his thinking about loops and systems. I actually reached out to Mr. Sellers, basically asked him if I could sort of hire him to do a little bit of sort of mentoring, coaching, consulting, whatever you want to call it, basically to help me with the design. This was at the prompting of my brother. I was going to say, I'm reading this book. This guy's so great. And he's like, well, why don't you just get in touch and see if you guys could work together for a few hours? And so we did, which was a really cool. I shared a draft of the design doc that I had, and he spent some time going over it and gave me some feedback. And one of the points that he identified was, I'm trying to make the design more systemic, and I want to have the different systems in the game, the asteroid mining and the farming plants and the crafting systems. I want to have them all interact in more complex ways, right, to make the game more interesting and dynamic in a mechanical sense. And one of the things that he pointed out is he said, what you could do to link all these systems together is to put a money system into the game, right? Which is actually what both Animal Crossing and Stardew do, right? To make turnip kind of fungible in the game, to make it a resource that can then go and interact with different systems, you sell it, right? You sell it in Animal Crossing, you turn it into bells, and then you can use that to buy a shirt or whatever it is, right? There isn't a way for a turnip or a peach to interact directly with the clothing system, right? Instead, it has this intermediary kind of soluble currency that everything can be turned in and out of money. Well, maybe not everything, right? But things can pretty seamlessly, with low friction, be sold and turned into money, and then you can then use the money to interact with other systems. And Stardew is similar, right? You grow turnips, you sell them, you buy seeds, you buy upgrades, and so on, so that the money becomes the kind of central nexus for the game design. That is obviously a big reflection of the capitalist society that we live in, right? That's how our society works as well. That is an interesting point about how game design and society and politics and our kind of societal system that we live in of capitalism all link together. Well, some of the books that I most love reading are science fiction novels, and there are two writers that have really thought about this and worked on these ideas in ways that I find very interesting and inspiring. One of them is Iain Banks. So Iain Banks is unfortunately was a Scottish science fiction writer. He passed away a few years ago. He had a series of science fiction books about a society called The Culture, which was a kind of a galactic spanning post-capitalist, post-scarcity culture in which superpowered AIs, nanotechnology, basically kind of magical super science had made it so nobody needed to work if they don't want to. You can kind of basically do whatever you want as long as it doesn't infringe on anybody else. And it's this kind of world where automation, AI, and technology have liberated people from the struggle for survival, right? Liberated people from the need to struggle to earn subsistence and a living and food, clothing, and shelter. That is just guaranteed. It's basically taken care of by robots. For somebody living in capitalism now, where we all still do very much have to struggle and survive for food, clothing, and shelter, it's a compelling and kind of almost utopian idea. On the other hand, we have Cory Doctorow and his novel Walk Away, which it's a beautiful book that I can't recommend enough if you're interested in this kind of thing. And it's basically about a transition moment from a kind of an amplified surveillance capitalist kind of very high wealth inequality, very high degrees of surveillance. Kind of what we have is through kind of 3D printing and this kind of open source movement, we have a group of people who walk away, as they call it. And they basically just literally walk out of kind of capitalist society into these big unoccupied areas, right? And they set up this kind of anarchist communes powered by 3D printers, open source blueprints for anything, any material object that you wanted to create with a 3D printer, right? And the idea is that we're getting into a place where matter and consumable goods and even built structures and so on can all be kind of constructed with 3D printing, labor, and software. What's interesting about it is the walk away culture totally eschews the use of money. And they also avoid any kind of social stack ranking or kudos points or karma points or other money-like alternative point systems for organizing society. Instead, operate in a kind of a purely voluntary, gift-based mode. And this is, I think, a very interesting idea. This also connects to a book that I've been reading called The Gift, which is written by Hyde. In The Gift, he's analyzing gift-giving, gift-based cultures. And this kind of goes back to traditional indigenous pre-capitalist societies where gift-giving was a big part of the social structure, separate from money. And importantly, gift-giving not as a mode of barter, right? This is not I give you a cow and you give me a sheep and 5 carrots. This is saying I give you this beautiful necklace, and by doing so, I show that I am a valuable member of society. I gain status and prestige. I form a relationship with you, or maybe I form a relationship with your group or tribe or your society, right? And how gift-giving and this kind of non-barter, non-monetary exchange, how that plays out in culture, how it affects life, how it affects relationships between people. In the world of the game, there is no money. This is a long way around of saying, in the world of the game, there's no money. And the design needs to work without that kind of fungible, soluble resource that everything can just turn into money and then turn into something else. Instead, I'm trying to design and build loops where the plants that you grow in the plant growing system go into a cooking system, and then you cook some food and you give it as a gift to an NPC character, right? And then the NPC character maybe gives you back a recipe or a piece of information that you can then use to interact with a different system in the game. It's about kind of having these paths of resources through the system that are not mediated by money and that are not expressed in this kind of capitalist monetary exchange mode, which I think is, first of all, systemically interesting. It's harder, which, of course, I chose the harder way to do it. I think it's interesting in the perspective of that place where game design starts to touch social commentary or political commentary. My politics are definitely left of center, right? And I live in Europe, where we have kind of much more social democracy than in the United States, where I'm originally from. And I think it's interesting to interrogate these ideas, to interrogate capitalism and money and all these things, and to think about what does a life look like where that's not the center of it. I'm deeply engaged in capitalism, right? I'm somebody who runs a business, so I'm not reflexively against money or capitalism completely, but I think it's good to be critical and to kind of look at it as a tool that needs to be controlled and shaped. And so I think that there's an interesting opportunity here in the game design and looking at these ideas and trying to find something that might be interesting for people to interact with in a systemic perspective. Then maybe that can be something that interacts out with the world in the form of a conversation or a kind of a critical perspective. So that's one of the ways that I'm thinking about the design, how it interacts with this larger kind of framework of ideas, how that manifests in the actual literal game design, right? Of saying, okay, we're not going to use this soluble currency of money. We're going to have these systems actually interact with each other directly. And that's something that I'm working on in developing the design. So hopefully you found this interesting. If you did, please drop a like on the video if you enjoyed it. If you're not already subscribed, please consider doing so. We appreciate it. Drop me a comment down below if this is something that you're kind of interested to think more about, if you've read any of these books, or if you have any other book suggestions for me actually along these lines. I'm a big reader and I always love to get book suggestions. So let me know. And yeah, just as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.